Hi, my dear Astro family. Welcome back to my channel. Well, I'm curious if you feel like the world is losing its absolute mind over the next few weeks. Well, you are not imagining it. Starting on the 22nd of May, the cosmic rules are officially being thrown out of the window. Mercury, the planet of communication, tech, and information, is breaking out of bounds in the sign of Gemini. It's going to be happening on 11th degree. But it's not alone. Venus is already out there waiting for it. So Venus went out of bound a couple of weeks ago on 12th degree of Gemini as well. And when the planets responsible for how we think, how we talk, how we spend money, um, or the planet how we process information escape the control of the sun at the exact time, then, or on the exact degree, really, then the Gemini cusp of our chart is going to fracture a little bit. So we are entering a 3 week window of absolute informational lawlessness, rogue potential financial moves, unfiltered truth that cannot be pretty much unsaid. So let's look at the timeline because the dates on this are incredibly precise. So we've got on May 22nd, Mercury crosses the line at 11 degree of Gemini, because Gemini is Mercury's home territory. This isn't just a standard transit. It's Mercury on hyperdrive. That mental filters are kind of coming completely off. Don't forget for a second that we do have got also Uranus in the sign of Gemini as well. Now, Venus is tracking right alongside it. So, like I said, Venus is already in the sign of Cancer, but it is still out of bound, and it started its journey on 12th degree of Gemini also. So this means that your logic and your desires are very much kind of like joining forces. Traditional boundaries, social etiquettes, niceties, standard corporate narratives are going to feel completely irrelevant. People are just going to be saying whatever they want, really. People are potentially launching their radical ideas, taking certain pretty massive risks as well. On a global scale, expect absolute chaos in the media or financial markets. We are likely going to see massive unvented data leaks, whistleblowers dropping bombshells. Um, if you are a creator, a writer, an entrepreneur, it's a time to kind of become these mad scientists, really. So you can actually create really viral videos with this as well. There is going to be a bit of a plot twist with this out of bound period. Oh, by the way, I haven't given the finish line, but so Mercury goes out of bound on 11 degree. It's going to be finishing its out of bound period on 18 degree of Cancer on June 14th. Why it's so special is because Venus is finishing its out of bound journey around 22 degree of Cancer as well. But on top of that, we are going to be having the moon going out of bound in the sign of Gemini also, 1 degree of Gemini on the 14th of June. Moon is going to be out of bound for about 5 days. So it's pretty much going to be finishing its out of bound period, very late degrees of Cancer, very early degrees of Leo. Isn't that truly remarkable? Basically, everyone is starting its out of bound period in the sign of Gemini. I do believe so. Now, let's just talk about what out of bound planet is. It means that the planet is going to be exceeding 23.27 declination, which is kind of like the maximum boundary of the sun, north or south of the celestial equator. Please do not mix this up with um, with the degree of the planet. Okay, it's nothing like that. I've explained that in the Venus Autobound video, if you would like to refer back to that. But imagine this energy as a planet which steps outside the royal court. It disregards the court's rules and it enters that wild, kind of unregulated territory that no one is going to be able to see it. So when Mercury breaks past that 23.27 declination boundary, that mental or communicative filters come completely off. So the standard of logic, social etiquette, linear thinking no longer apply. So therefore, it's actually super good to go ahead with some of your ideas, especially with some unconventional ideas, because imagine this as being like brilliant, but it can be totally unhinged as well at the same time. This is potentially when people start thinking outside of the box because they literally cannot see where the box is anymore. There is no framework to it. We need to be careful with unfiltered communication because we can have the urge to speak the truth without kind of like sugarcoating. And of course, it's very easy to hurt others as well, right? But it can manifest as a sheer genius person as well. You can make really shocking statements, or it can cause an absolute informational chaos, which might be leading to certain type of misunderstandings. Remember, Mercury is the planet of tricks, so the trickster archetype is amplified here as well. Mercury loves to play games. And when it's out of bound, its trickster nature is amplified. So expect bizarre news, for example, viral trends that make zero sense, but for some reason it might still go viral. And sudden shifts in public discourse as well, most likely. So when we compare an out-of-bound Mercury with an inbound Mercury, you just need to imagine that as Mercury just being a lot more wild. So Mercury in Gemini sometimes it just talks for the sake of talking. When it's out of bound, it wants to talk the truth. Or, um, Mercury becomes a lot faster as well when it's out of bounds. So it's more like high processing speed, very much adaptability, a lot of curiosity, processing information rapidly without normal social boundaries. Now, an out of bound is so hyperdrive, zero mental filters, information overload. So, for example, if it happens in your third house, you might be spending a lot of hours of doing some research or studying and so forth. So, this is when Mercury goes rogue, breaking formatting, speaking the unspeakable, maniac information kind of dumping on others as well. Mercury in Gemini is already incredibly fast. So picking up data points from anywhere is not a shock. Once it goes out of bound on the 22nd, that processing speed goes into kind of an overdrive. So that's why I would call it the mad scientist, the rebel intellectual type of archetype. On a Mundane level, when Mercury goes out of bound in a sign, it rules that data, gossip, news, media can feel like it's a tidal wave. So let me give you a scenario how I can imagine that. Maybe imagine that your marketing team, for example, has been stuck in a creative rut. Maybe they are trying to, pitch a standard campaign and it just doesn't work. And then all of a sudden, Mercury goes out of bound, and then they throw out this wild, maybe borderline offensive, but completely brilliant proposal that somehow breaks the company's traditional branding. It's risky, but obviously it might get accepted or it might get rejected. But if it gets accepted, it could be something that really is super good for the company. Yes, most likely this is a period of time when you attract people who love you for it and people who hate you for it as well. Or imagine that a public figure or a journalist goes off script during a live broadcast, and instead of reading the teleprompter notes, they just blurt out their intrusive thoughts or a piece of insider information they weren't supposed to share. And then it goes viral, of course, sparking quite a massive, kind of debate. Oh, is it fixed? Or I remember I was watching a talent show, and I remember it was out of bound. Mercury, actually. I can't remember what was the sign, but it was an out of bound Mercury long time ago. And what happened was that the TV presenter said the eliminated contestants before the envelope got handed over to the person. So obviously they started talking about whether it's all fixed or what's the point in giving a phone call and all those type of stuff. And he got explained that he could hear in his ears already obviously, they checked already the voting system and stuff like that, or maybe, of course, it was fixed. God knows, but that was the explanation that they had given around that time. So, like I said, Venus also started its out of bound period on 12 degree of Gemini, even though it didn't happen at the same time, but we do have got a synchronicity here, right? And I've made a video about that if in case you are curious about it. But Venus is about what we find beautiful and how we relate. So an out of bounds Venus completely rejects traditional relationship structures and standard artistic norms and conventional financial strategies. So combining the degree of out of bound Venus, which is our radical desires, unconventional charm, with an out of bound Mercury degree, which is about unfiltered communication, so this is, it's like the words kind of become drugs, absolute drugs, really. So, or imagine that in standard Gemini, Venus likes to keep things light, flirtatious, a bit of casual type of connections. But outside the bounds, the detachment turns into a radical demand for freedom and intellectual novelty. So people kind of rewrite the rules of engagement, the rules of relationships, and taboo topics in relationships are discussed with kind of total transparency in a way, which is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Um, but of course, the hyperlogical conversation about non-traditional relationship dynamics are also highly possible. Of course, on mundane level, this might be talking to us about nations that could be sitting down, for example, having conversations and maybe certain type of agreement as well, which we would have never been able to imagine in our wildest dreams. But of course, Mercury, Venus, starting at the same place, kind of talks to me about a contract negotiations in love or suddenly breaking a long-standing social etiquette rule just to see what happens. And of course, it could be happening between nations as well. An out-of-bound planet is always a bit bizarre. So, because Venus, for example, rules assets and commerce and finances, Mercury rules trade and marketing. So when both cross the line in Gemini, we can expect sudden chaotic shifts in digital marketing, viral marketing campaigns that leverage complete absurdity, the monetization of highly unconventional stuff. We can take a lot of high risk, speculative ideas, and that could gain a massive traction as well because somehow the collective mind is bored by anything safe or traditional. So surely I can, I'm thinking of a scenario, thinking about negotiation and certain type of contracts because Venus, Gemini, Mercury, like imagine two business entities or maybe creative partners sit down to draft a contract and maybe instead of using some standard legal templates. They completely threw out the old framework of the window and they write up a highly customized, maybe more flexible, maybe utterly bizarre agreement, but based on transparency or certain type of experimental kind of profit sharing modules and so forth. So this is one scenario that I surely can imagine. Like I said, Venus finishes its out of bound period on 23-degree Cancer. Mercury finishes on 18-degree of Cancer. So that means that both of them go back into inbound. So the Gemini phase, that was, the experimentation is very loud, social, externalized, hyper conceptual. That's a crazy idea. That's breaking communication rules. But that Cancer phase, that would talk to us about internalization. It turns towards security, family, ancestral patterns, emotional boundaries can be thrown out of the window. That rogue energy shifts or what we say to how we protect our emotional core. So, when these two planets go inbound, basically there's going to be a reality check. So with Mercury, it's a reality check on logic. You know, um, Coming back inbound at 18-degree Cancer kind of forces the mind to answer a very grounded, kind of emotional question there. Is this idea safe? Is this idea sustainable? Is this idea emotionally nurturing for my life, for my family, and so forth. So obviously that manic information overload stops somehow. And then in the sign of Cancer, we want to pull back. We want to go quiet. We want to process everything they just kind of blurted out or discovered over the last 3, 4 weeks. And Mercury and Venus are quite intuitive in the sign of Cancer. So it's more of a return to that intuitive, kind of protective way of thinking. Now, with Venus, um, out of bound in the sign of Gemini brought us unconventional relationship dynamics, or we have been experiencing some financial choices. Dropping back in bounds at 23-degree Cancer feels like returning home after maybe, a wild trek, for example. So that desire for stability, nesting, creating that emotional safety, spending time together with our loved ones are more heightened. So collective focus shifts away from what's exciting back to what protects my tribe or stabilizes my foundation. Like I said, Moon will start its out of bound energy on the 13th of June as well, in the sign of Gemini too. So that's super interesting because obviously Moon is going to be spending there 2 days only, but it started there. So that's really important. And basically, the collective emotional body detaches from that standard reality again and hooks directly into that hyper stimulated, rule breaking networking. So, moon represents our emotions. So the moon rules our instinctual, emotional responses to things. So when Mercury and Venus goes back inbound, and let's say we stop doing that hyperactivity that we did, the moon reacts to it. That's not what was promised to me. My feelings are not rationalized somehow, not as intellectualized. It's imagine this as kind of like a cosmic handoff, really. The moon is basically supercharging those dying degrees of Mercury, Venus, really, not dying degrees. That's not the word I was looking for. Anyway, it reactivates those degrees. And then the moon starts experimenting somehow with the truth as well. So all I'm trying to say is that the Gemini cusp of your chart is really magnified. So I would love to hear what is happening in your Gemini part of your chart? Do you feel that it is a bit more chaotic overall? However, I want to make a certain type of world predictions as well. Um, I would say that between May 22nd to second week of June, I think there's going to be a certain type of sophisticated piece of data leaked out. It might be an audio recording or a letter or a phone conversation, for example. But there could be a hyper realistic AI generated video clip that could be kind of dropped on the global stage as well. And it will completely bypass mainstream media kind of gatekeepers, going direct to consumer, maybe by certain type of decentralized platforms or some alternative news channels and so forth, tricking us in a way, and we don't know what to believe. But the public can become so obsessed with this that they might not be able to kind of like let it go in a way. I can also imagine that the public can be so obsessed with the entertainment value and the sheer speed of that data that no one will care if it's entirely accurate or fabricated, because there's an entertainment element to it. And it could be kind of hijacking international diplomacy. It could be actually affecting, for example, the stock market, as in Venus money and so forth. Because Venus rules assets, currency, what the market values really, and Mercury rules trade and transactions and logistics. So I can imagine a massive, completely illogical surge in speculative trading. Maybe it's a meme coin, for example, or a failing tech stock will be aggressively pumped by some retail investors. Um or certain type of regulatory bodies will try to halt trading or impose fines. But this out of bound energy means that the rogue traders will literally laugh at the regulations, trying to find loopholes to be able to keep going with something. So I can imagine that some people will be making millions pretty much overnight, or they are going to be losing millions overnight as well, or assets. Because we can go into something that has no physical value, or simply we can be making a huge amount of money with that too. Or I can imagine maybe a major piece of entertainment or a movie, a high-profile music is going to be released. And that might be featuring some really cutting, dark type of atmosphere, really. Maybe there is a message behind it as well. Gemini rules messages, trying to expose certain type of hypocrisy, for example. But something can become a global phenomenon. It could be the most downloaded video, for example, in the first week, or it could be breaking the offices, for example, at the theaters or cinemas and all those type of stuff. I can imagine that in a big company, a major PR team is going to get fired, for example, just because they screwed up something. So, or the secretary of the prime minister and all this type of stuff. So I definitely can even imagine. With three planets being out of bound in the sign of Gemini, even though it's not at the same time, but surely it's an absurdity when it comes to that information data, or certain neighborhood countries can go rogue as well. And people who have had really great connections, for example, you had a great connections with your neighbor, and all of a sudden that could just go way, way too much. But we can expect cyber glitch, for example, or we can expect kind of like a virus, for example, on our laptops as well, something that is difficult to shut down in a way. Or I can imagine that maybe public transport is going to shutting down or it's not going to be as productive as usual. So we can expect major traffic jams in big cities and so on. So, or I can imagine that governments or and massive tech companies will abruptly crack down. Um, or I can imagine new kind of data privacy related legislations that could be coming out and banning something, like banning a specific communication app, which is affecting a lot of people. And it could be, for example, a dating application with Venus being in the picture. So, that is it. Now, I did speak about my last weekly videos about these out-of-bound phenomenons for each 12 signs. So maybe I'm just going to be giving you a bit of a summary here. So let's do Aries rising sign. So this double out-of-bound energy pretty much explodes in your third house, the house of communication. Like I said, it might be removing your mental filters. You are likely to pitch a borderline unhinged but brilliant ideas. Or you send them an unfiltered text message that completely disrupts your daily job, daily circle as well. And remember that it's going to be shifting into your fourth house. So dragging your attention back down to reality. And you will want to delete your social media apps, lock your front door, quietly processing the informational chaos. And then you just want to be kind of like processing information on your couch. So it looks like that the next few weeks is going to be extremely busy for you. Now let's look at Leo rising sign, for example. So moving through the fire signs first, where your 11th house is going to get activated there, which is the house of networks, audiences. And your audience can catch absolute fire as Mercury and Venus kind of run wild together. So this is very good for you to launch highly unconventional viral videos, marketing campaigns, drop a piece of media that shocks your community, for example, and people would become very entertained, most likely, by these radical changes that you make. But do not expect traditional compliance from your collaborators, for example. And once this party ends, you are retreating back into the 12th house to rest, to recharge, to protect your energy. You might have attended a lot of social events, for example, and then you can be super tired from it. So the 12th house is going to tell you to slow down a little bit and rest. Sagittarius rising sign, this is happening in your seventh house, the house of relationships and contracts. So relationship and contracts can go a little bit wild, kind of like a lawless territory. You and your partners maybe are going to have some intense, very hyper logical conversation that completely throw out the traditional rules of engagement. So we are agreeing on some crazy ideas. Oh, okay, we would like to welcome a third member in our relationship, or whatever wildness could be going down there. You can be drafting this very bizarre new business deal with someone. You are rewriting your love life. You can walk out of the life of someone, and of course, you can meet someone out of the blue as well. But somehow the old boundaries within the relationship do not apply anymore. And once that stops, you are actually again retreating into your eighth house, and then you are going to be anchoring those wild agreements into more of kind of like a financial container. Now let's have a look at the earth sign. So let's do Taurus rising sign. So this is going to be happening in your second house, the house of money, assets, your personal values. So you might find yourself tempted by highly risky, speculative, unconventional type of investments. and completely altering how you monetize your talents, how you use your money as well. We are not as cautious with our money, so it all goes out of the window as your desire for material freedom kind of like is going to be sitting in the driver's seat. But then once June arrives, that rogue kind of trading, money spending, and so forth is going to be ending in your third house, forcing you to use maybe local, practical data to kind of secure what you have just built. And we're going to have to think through how we can carry on the momentum, just being a little bit more sober with that. Virgo rising sign. So this is happening in your 10th house, the house of career, public reputation. So that's a bit of an awakening there, really. So maybe you are going to be bypassing your bosses, your corporate gatekeepers. You are going to be launching a kind of a rogue project, something that you are going to be changing your public messaging with zero sugarcoating. Maybe you want to be addressing something with your audience, for example. And it looks like that the public would be rewarding this total lack of filter somehow. But maybe some traditional industries, like your bosses, might look at you like you have lost your mind. But this outbound period is going to be stopping in your 11th house. So it feels like that you have been doing this public sprint. And then all of a sudden, you are trying to find safety through your friends. You want to be creating a protective community, someone who is going to be supporting your new directions. With Capricorn rising sign, it's going to be happening in your sixth house, the house of routines, work projects, wellness, protocols. And all those are getting completely disrupted by this very chaotic energy. So you are not attending your standard calendar anymore. You are trying out new things. You are experimenting new work methods. You are multitasking. You are doing a lot of tricks, for example, at work, therefore violating standards and operating procedures and stuff like that, kind of cutting corners because we want to get the job quicker done. And so therefore your productivity level can be increasing quite significantly, but you might be running the risk of mental burnout though. And then when the wheels stop spinning, then the energy is going to start settling in your seventh house, prompting you to seek stability and emotional support in your closest relationships. Air signs. So let's start with Gemini rising sign. Obviously, this is happening in your first house. And that's you, that's your identity, that's your expressive style. So therefore, you are completely going rogue. You are kind of like, surely you want to start fresh, maybe potentially throwing people out of your life, having a lot of unconventional ideas. You can have a lot of sharp wit as well, a total disregard for social etiquette. Your brain is going to be operating on like this hyperdrive. Therefore, it makes it a perfect moment to reinvent your branding, launching in kind of like an avant-garde personal project, and so on. But this energy is all going to settle in your second house. So you're going to start quietly budgeting your resources and protecting your energy. Libra rising sign. So this is happening in your ninth house, the house of belief systems, publishing, long-term plans as well. And all those are breaking completely outside standard boundaries. So you are going to be finding yourself potentially hyper fixated on philosophies, alternative research. Oh, excuse me. Or you are trying to publish a piece of work, or you are going to be publishing something that kind of shatters the mainstream narratives completely. I think watch out because it's very easy to force your perspective. to fit into inside traditional academic and corporate boxes right now as well, or others might want to force you to do so. But all these are going to be quieting down in your 10th house. So you are going to be reaching a conclusion, and then you are going to be forced in a way to apply your radical insights to the real world. Let's say career security, for example. So you're going to have to be reviewing whether those wild ideas are working in the real life. Aquarius rising sign. So we're going to be having this outbound energy in your fifth house, the house of creativity, romance, self-expression. And basically, that fifth house is in an unregulated, kind of like chaotic playground right now for you. So if you're an artist or a writer, this could be really about producing something avant-garde, something satirical, really, something that kind of ignores the traditional rules of the craft. But in romantic life, you might find yourself craving, you know, more intellectual novelty from the partner or radical freedom rather than these predictable dates. So instead of, I don't know, having a dinner all the time, why are we not doing something fun? All of a sudden, you can have this desire to travel more. Imagine this as like a parade, like a circus type of stuff that could be happening until June. But of course, it's going to be settling in your sixth house. And after, we're going to have to return back to work. And we're going to have to realize that, reality hits. And then I'm going to have to be focusing a little bit more on my domestic chores, health. Maybe we have partied a lot while we had these fifth house activations. And then now we're going to have to return back to the normal daily routines. Let's look at the water signs. Let's start with Cancer rising sign. So this is going to be happening in your 12th house, the house of subconscious, hidden data, really. So it feels like that your mind is going to be flooded with intense nightmares, bizarre dreams, overwhelming urge to uncover secrets, for example. Maybe even I want to be spending a lot more time behind closed doors than ever. There could be a lot of processing of psychological information as well. I mean, it's a brilliant time to do private research or deep creative writing, working behind the scenes as well. But then all of these are going to be stopping once it is in your first house, triggering your ascendant. So it is going to bring you out of that hiding. Hopefully, you're going to become more confident, and then you are ready to share your new insights to the world. Scorpio rising sign. So this is going to be happening in your eighth house, the house of investments, resources, taboos, psychological complexes. So you might maybe negotiate about a very, like a highly unconventional financial contract, or dealing with some sudden shifts in joint assets, or finding yourself speaking with brutal transparency about topics that you usually would keep hidden, or you would kind of remain quiet about, because the desire to break free from any type of restrictive financial ties or emotional contracts, it all of a sudden, all of those can become super urgent for you. And these are going to be ending, of course, in your ninth house. So I think it's going to be giving you the perspective needed to anchor these changes into more of a long-term philosophy. And last but not least, Pisces rising sign. This is happening in your fourth house, the house of home, family, foundational security. So you can expect really chaotic conversations with relatives, sudden impulses to radically rearrange your living space, renegotiations of your domestic boundaries, relocation, for example. Your private life feel can feel more restless, more kind of invaded, potentially because maybe you have got guests around a lot more times, or simply you don't want anyone to kind of come around because you want to be detaching yourself from these social activities, for example. But it's all going to be finishing up in your fifth house. So we have got these domestic storms that clears out really. And then it somehow should be allowing you to give you a lot of inspiration. And maybe you are going to be starting a highly rewarding creative project by locking yourself away from any type of mental noise. So, guys, this is it. I hope it helps, and then do let me know how you feel about your Gemini cusp of your chart. Take care, everyone, and I will see you in my next video. Bye bye.